Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, Dynasty League, PPR League, IDP League, even Daily Fantasy Football League. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's going on, everybody? It is the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to, thank you all for listening, man. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for clicking on the link. Every time you do, it helps us out, man. Let us know what you like. Don't forget to send in some nice words, kind words, mean words, words that just make us feel something, you know? Because I'm trying to feel something right now because we're in the high stakes here. So I'm gonna give myself a half pat on the back because I have secured the playoffs for one out of the two leagues I'm in. The Yahoo League, I think I'm on like a 3 or 4 game win streak, something like that. I don't remember as far as just how many wins I've been on. I could probably look that up right now. Let's see. It does not tell me actually, as far as I see. However, I have secured a playoff berth. I am no longer in constant doubt of what my status is in this fantasy league. So it's going well, man. You know, I started off pretty rough. I was like 2-3, 2-4, but I gutted it out. I ended up 7-5, and that is strong comeback vibes here. Strong comeback vibes. So, yeah, man, I don't even have to worry about this coming week. My placement is secure in the playoffs, and I don't really care about seeding. It's nonsense. See, if you care about seeding in playoff, unless you have a bye, then it's kind of it's a waste of time. Like, I have secured. I don't have to worry about my lineup, but I will say it just for podcast reasons. I will tell you my lineup coming up really soon. And in my other league, I am fighting tooth and nail to the depth. I am 9th out of, there's an 8-man playoff out of 14 users, and I am number 9. So if you win, you get in, essentially. And I have to win to get in. I cannot take a loss and potentially get in. There'll be a lot of different scenarios for that to occur, and I don't think that is the case. And unfortunately, I am going up against one of the league's best teams, even though he has a couple guys who are kind of leaning towards not being too well. So let's just hope for the best. Both the quarterbacks that he has on the roster are not, doing too well right now. He has Kyler Murray and he has Ben Roethlisberger, and they're kind of wishy-washy. So we'll see what will be the case. But I think I have no choice. I have to win, and I'm going to find a way to do it. So without further ado, you know how we like to start off the pod. We like to talk about what has been happening in my leagues and what can I do to make up for said shortcomings, or talk about what I did to succeed. So, of course, I took the loss last week. I said that on Tuesday's pod, and finally, I know where my standings is in this league, in ESPN, where my team basically is ride or die on Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara right now, and basically Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill's floor is pretty solid at 18 points a game. I think that's pretty guaranteed at this point, unless he just has a horrible outing. I really hope this is not the week where Taysom Hill gets benched mid-game and Jameis comes in. But even then, I think Taysom's floor is so high because they would still probably use Taysom in other ways besides quarterback, if that was the case. And I think he'd be the only guy I know in football that would be able to take a benching and still, it's still like, kind of crazy. Like, he can still go crazy for you. But starting this week, I've already set my lineup essentially. I'm only waiting on a few things. Like, I'm waiting on a waiver pickup for a kicker, and I am waiting on a defense because right now I have the Giants defense against Seattle, and I know Seattle isn't going super air raid right now or anything like that, but I want to get some solid matchups against some teams, and I want to be able to, have a chance. I want to be able to have a good chance this week, and I don't want to falter to too much pain, right? I don't want to falter to that much pain. So with that said, right, as I think about this, as the defense I started out with was in fact the Kansas City Chiefs, and I'm going to I'm going to just go acquire them real quick. That makes sense. So the thing is here's my team. Here's the moves I got going. I got Taysom Hill, Alvin Kamara, who, with all intents and purposes, we know what the story is. Taysom Hill is not throwing him the ball unless his floor is drastically lower with him on the court. On the field with him. And I get that, but it's still Alvin Kamara. He can still be fed touchdowns. And I know last week we saw the Latavius Murray show, but honest opinion, Denver's defense was just, our offensive line was not ready. As you know, Teron Armstead wasn't in there. And Teron Armstead is a big anchor for that Saints O-line, believe it or not. And I'm pretty sure most people do believe it. So that definitely affected some things of what they wanted to do. And they realized that even though in the passing game, their pass protection wasn't great. Bradley Chubb was getting back there as Jason was taking sacks, and his throwing was not looking great. They could always just run down the middle. They were getting chunk plays in the run game so much. They didn't have to utilize Alvin Kamara in the pass game again. And Michael Thomas, wasn't utilized that much either, but it wasn't necessary. And honestly, they both kind of just took a day off. Essentially, not to say that they took a day off, but they didn't need to do as much to win that game because they came in a game against a team with no quarterback. So Alvin will still start your studs. It's make it or break it time. It is what it is. Cam Akers has to start for me. This is his first start in my lineup ever. I think Cam Akers is getting the start here, and it's because Ronald Jones is on bye. So Cam Akers is getting the start. Of course, Michael Thomas is my wide receiver 1. I'm trying to decide if I want Nelson Aguilar in there, but as my wide receiver 2, but he was not a participant in practice on Thursday, and he's missed 2 consecutive practices to an ankle injury, so it's probably that he's not going to be playing. So, unfortunately, that means someone else has to take take the helm here. And I'm looking at the matchups. I'm figuring some things out. I think that best case scenario, because I have too many wide receivers that could potentially do something, right? And we've seen a couple teams really get into Las Vegas. We've seen teams, of course, we know Cincinnati's defense is pretty bad. And we know that Minnesota has a tendency to get bad too, even though they've played a lot better. I think, honestly, Denzel Mims was on my bench, and Jakeem Grant are the 2 plays here for me. And I know Mims has had a solid 10, stretch here, and I believe in Mims, so to speak. I think Mims has it here. I think Mims can be I'm going to move him in my flex, of course. And I'm going to move up Michael Pittman Jr. because I know last week was bad, but I still think he's going to be a big target in his offense. And I'm not too worried of the poor performance And I think that was more of an outcome of just them all being bad. And considering he still had 9 targets, so I think that he still is getting the volume that's nice for a guy who could be a solid 2 option. He's going up against Houston, who's, you can put some points on Houston if you pass protect well and stuff like that. Austin Hooper at tight end for me is going to be a big play. He's going up against Tennessee, who is a plus matchup with tight ends, and they're going to need to win this game, Cleveland, to really make a statement here. And I think Austin Hooper is going to start turning it on here, coming down the stretch, where he's playing Tennessee. He does play Baltimore, which is rough. So you might need to look for another tight end for Week 14 if you make it to playoffs. But then you have the New York Giants and the New York Jets for potential championship week. So that's solid play right there. Then, of course, I said Denzel Mims, who goes up against the Vegas Raiders, who is not a bad matchup to have. Then he goes against Seattle, and we understand Seattle is going up against the Jets, but if this is a blowout, we're going to have to throw the ball anyway. And then LA Rams and Cleveland for his rest of season. So he won't necessarily, we'll see what happens, but I don't think he's going to be a put in your lineup guy unless something catastrophic happens for you. Right now, I have the Giants defense in. It won't be there for too much longer, but they did the job last week. And the rest of the season is kind of rough because they do have some tough matchups. They do have Arizona, and they have Cleveland, and they have Baltimore. But, defenses are kind of wishy-washy. They can change up on you real quick. And then kicker, I'm working on it. I had Joey Slides on by, working on it right now. I'm trying to make some things happen. I'm trying to pick up Harrison Buckner, and the Chiefs defense I'm trying to pick up as well. So that is the case here. And let me just go over my opponent's team just to keep things in perspective. He has Kyler Murray, he has Nick Chubb, he has Miles Sanders, Tyler Boyd, Tyler Lockett, Richard Rodgers, he has Antonio Brown, he has the Green Bay Packers. I'm sorry, he doesn't have Antonio Brown. He has A.J. Brown, he has the Packers defense, and he has as Miami's kicker Jason Sanders. On his bench, he has Corey Davis, Josh Kelly, Damian Harris, Jacoby Myers, Tim Patrick, Ben Roethlisberger, Joe Mixon, who's on IR, and Mark Andrews, who is out currently. So that's why he's starting Richard Rodgers right now, is because Mark Andrews is not going to play for Dallas due, I believe, COVID has got him out. So, yeah, man, that's his team. It's pretty star-studded, but Kyler Murray is going up against the Rams. That's a bad matchup for him. I would not be surprised if he starts Ben Roethlisberger against Washington, but Washington has a pretty spunky defense too. And I don't know, Pittsburgh has not really been laying it out there like that. The past 2 weeks has only been 16 against Jacksonville, whose defense is not great, and 12 against Baltimore last week on Wednesday when he threw for 266 and a touchdown. But they just don't look to be 100% in sync. And I think another good front seven will really put some pressure on him, and we'll see what Big Ben can do. But, Kyler Murray, who has kind of been injured, but not really saying he's injured, like, he practiced fully on this Thursday, the day I'm recording this. So that's a good sign. But he is going up against the Rams, which is not a great matchup. He just came across New England, where he only had 170 yards passing, and his rushing has been significantly decreasing as far as efficiency and stuff like that. So if you look at this, he only had 7.9 points on the week. He only had 5 rushing attempts, both games, week 11, week 12. One was for 15 yards, one was for 31. And I think teams are starting to adjust to the Kyler Murray cheese. So that is something to look out for. However, he does have Nick Chubb, and Nick Chubb has been absolutely phenomenal all season long. As long as he plays, he's great. The only time he was really trash was week 1 and then week 10 or week 4 and week 1 he went up against Baltimore. It's kind of was expected. Baltimore was playing at a different level than everybody else in the beginning of the season. Dallas, he got hurt, and since then he's been fine, and then he had a really big game against Jacksonville last week, and unless Kareem Hunt takes away the end zone shots, I expect Nick Chubb to just be fine, and that's going to hurt me bad, but that is the case for sure. Another question mark is Miles Sanders, just because what his involvement in the offense is going to actually be like. Going up against Green Bay, that should have been more of a plus matchup for him, and they don't really utilize him as much as you'd like him to do. They do. He does have a decent amount of drops recently, but I think against Green Bay, it's going to be just another tough matchup because Green Bay has kind of figured out their defense things. But we're going to take our first break and we'll continue on our conversation and then move into more stuff. GSMC will be right back. Do you always feel like you are on the go? You can't stop. You just can't stop. Every time it's go, 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 nothing but hustle and bustle 24/7. Well, sometimes I feel like that too. And there's only one beer that's out there that's literally made for you to chill out, and that is Coors Light. Let me tell you, Coors Light is every Sunday for me, man. I got to do it. It makes me less stressed when it comes to fantasy football, just watching the Saints play. It really is great. And let me tell you, man, they got a whole new shebang coming, man. Don't miss out. The new packaging from Coors Light is already hitting the shelves. The new design features clear skies that invite you to sit back, unwind, and drink it all in. Mountain cold refreshment made to chill. Coors Light is cold lager, cold filtered, and cold packaged. It's literally made for you to chill. So, Coors Light is the one I choose when I need to unwind. So when you want to hit reset, reach for the beer that is made to chill. Get Coors Light in the new look delivered straight to your door at getcoorslight.com. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, GSMC Fantasy Football, we're back. And we were just talking about my opponent's lineup in this win or basically lose a chance to go to the playoffs week, as in the dreaded week 13. It's getting real. It probably has been real for the past few weeks, but it's real now. It's make it or break it time. And I'm really trying to come out strong this week. And, it could be anything can happen, but hopefully we can make something happen here. I was just finishing talking about Miles Sanders, and I'm going to move on to the rest of this guy's team because I think the more I talk myself into it, the more this guy might actually have a chance to have a sad week, even though he doesn't really need it. Of course, he's 9-3. He's clinched his playoff spot, secured it. So, but he has Tyler Boyd in his wide receiver 1 position. It doesn't really matter. Probably is Tyler Lockett if we're being for real. Or actually, it probably is A.J. Brown if we're being for real. But Tyler Boyd going up against Miami, who's a solid defense. And he's coming off a week where he had 3 catches for 15 yards. Does not have Joe Burrow anymore. Can it be possible that every Bengals player is essentially downgraded for sure? They're not must starts anymore. AJ Green is he's been droppable for a while. I'm not going to lie. It's been pain, but he had another donut game, did nothing. And if it weren't for the fact that T Higgins had a touchdown, he would have had a pretty bad game as well. So Going up against another tough defense, I think it's going to be pretty interesting how they utilize Tyler Boyd, but I'm not going to sit here and think that his 13-point projection is going to be exactly what he's going to get. So I think from that standpoint, it's going to be a tough outing for him. Tyler Lockett, who is going up against New York Giants. Tyler Lockett has kind of had a strange start of his season. In the first half, he looked 17, 19, 37. Then he went 5, 8, a bye week. Then he had 53, right? 200 yards, 15 catches, insane production, 3 touchdowns, right? Basically, it was almost like a doublement against he did against Dallas. Against San Francisco, he had 4 catches for 33 yards, 7 points. Against Buffalo, he had 4 catches for 40 yards. He had 8 points. Against the Rams, he had 66 yards on 5 catches for 11.6 points. And then Arizona was his best game by far, again, in the past month, where he had 21 points because he scored a touchdown. But in that game, he had 9 catches for 67 yards. So it wasn't horrible, but the touchdown definitely made it look sweeter than what it was. And then against Philly, he had 3 catches for 23. So there seems to be a trend here going here. And I think it's a trend that's following Seahawks players not named DK Metcalf all across the board. And that is they are running the ball. They are running the ball, and those numbers are coming down. And the passing display that we saw in the first 5 weeks of the season, where if we're being real, Tyler Lockett didn't benefit all that much in retrospect. I mean, the first 3 weeks for sure, but he played Atlanta, he played Dallas, and then when he played some solid defenses, things started to change. They're not just going to let him run deep every single time and, man time like that. That's what me and my friend said. He's going to have some man time with those cornerbacks. So let's move on. I don't know what else to say about Tyler Lockett. I think his 14-point projection is just what is possible, but I don't think that's what's probable. Richard Rodgers is an interesting start. He did have 3 catches for 53 yards and a touchdown, and we know tight ends are kind of interesting for the Philadelphia Eagles, but if you watched Carson Wentz play on Monday night, and you are willing to start any sort of receiving personnel, then more power to you. But I wouldn't put it on you to do that. I would not advise. I would stay away from the Eagles. We're going to talk about stay away teams for the remainder of the playoffs, or should I say stay away players and maybe teams later on in the podcast, because I feel like that would be good content. A.J. Brown. So A.J. Brown is kind of dinged up like everybody else. He did not practice Thursday, and he missed practices. Has been a big routine for him this year, but his hip issue is something new, and it might end up being something that we don't know about until later on Sunday's game. But if he misses practice when this podcast comes out, then we might have some real concern here. He has the Packers defense, which is a solid play against Philadelphia, who we've seen has been able to get turnovers or whoever, throw turnovers to the other team. And of course, his kicker is his kicker. But I don't want to come in and say I have some confidence, but I don't think I'm going to have another performance where Alvin Kamara has 6 points. Michael Pittman only gets 2 catches on 9 targets. I think there's a lot of room for growth here, and there's a lot of potential for what could be, something brewing in the system, you know what I'm saying? So there might be something here that I can take advantage of and potentially get a dub here. So that's the plan. Of course, we got to go get a dub. Let's move on to the league I'm already secured in. Just talk about what's going on here as far as my matchup this week, and to keep it going, shall we? Keep it going. So for week 13, I'm projected to get 102. My matchup is projected to get 80 points. He has Derek Carr starting. He has not changed a lot of things about his lineup. He still has Will Fuller, who is suspended, so that has to change. And honestly, considering he's a top seed, so this guy is number 3 right now in the league that I'm in, and of course because he has Will Fuller. So looking at his backups, he has Christian Kirk, which is solid. He has Jerry Jeudy, which is solid, even though he's kind of hurt. Tyler Boyd, who is, in the certain no man's land. And he has Curtis Samuel, who does not play. So it's got a lot of problems here. He has Nelson Aguilar as well, like I do. Shout out to Nelson Aguilar. This guy is running the Derek Carr, Nelson Aguilar stack right now, which is kind of crazy. Somehow he has Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry. How did I miss this? That's what? No wonder he. The fact that he's only 7-5 is kind of crazy, but hey, more power to you. This is a 10-man league, mind you. I don't know how this happened. Did Derek? I have to go back and look and review. How did we allow this? Jeez. But he has Dalvin Cook, who I think he's going to play, and he's going to be probably really good against the Jaguars. He has Derrick Henry, who's in a best running back in the league mode right now. He has Jonnu Smith. So he has a lot of pairings here. Strange. He has Jonnu Smith, who's a little questionable to play. He still has Robbie Anderson in his lineup, who's not available. He has Young Wei Koo, and he has Washington's defense. So he kind of has no choice but to start either Jerry Jeudy, Christian Kirk, or Tyler Boyd. Two of those out of the 3 people in those combinations. So we'll see what he does. On my side of things, I have Russell Wilson. I have Amari Cooper starting against Baltimore, which, in retrospect, I'm probably going to change that. But right now, I'm not too worried about it. I'll probably change it Sunday when I actually want to pay attention to fantasy again. I have Stephon Diggs starting up against San Francisco. I have Josh Jacobs in for right now. I'm trying to hopefully pick up his replacement off waivers, because if Josh Jacobs doesn't play or is very limited, then I'm interested in his backup, who has been picked up all across the leagues, but Mr. Booker, Devontae Booker. So I got to get into him. I have Dallas Goedert in, who I just talked about having Eagles players, but it is what it is. I think Dallas Goedert is their best offensive weapon outside of Miles Sanders, who I also have, and I think Miles Sanders is going to have a decent bounce back game. I have Justin Jefferson in as my flex wide receiver spot. I have Jason Myers, and I have the New Orleans Saints defense against Atlanta. We all know what can happen in Atlanta football games against the Saints, rivalry week and all of that. And I understand that David Montgomery had a good game and they're playing against Detroit, but I'm still kind of worried about his usage and his efficiency, and I don't want to be burned in a bad spot, even though the week doesn't matter, right? I just don't think that it would be the smartest play in the world. And that is just that's the end all be all of that, really. So those are my fantasy deeds. Those are my fantasy peeps. Those are my players, man. I gotta tell you, I don't have fear in fantasy football at this point, because we've seen everything, right? We've seen it all. We know the scenario now. Like maybe 2 weeks out from here, 2 weeks ago, when we really didn't know what the scenario would play out to be, because you could, one loss could have guaranteed I was not making a playoff, essentially, right? So I had to really win out in this league to secure a playoff spot, and thankfully I was able to do that in the Yahoo League. But for this ESPN League, it's really any week I could have lost and had a bad week, and everybody else had really good weeks, and I could have been down bad. I've been 9th place, I think, 3 times so far in this league. It's been very up and down, and it's very concerning, but you just keep playing until you know what the case is. If I was eliminated last week, I would have just been eliminated last week. It is what it is. But since I know that it's kind of win in advance, you know what the reality of your situation is, and that's all you can really do. So all you can do is hope. So we're going to try and exude some hope, and I'm going to actually try to exude some confidence in you guys. So send me some stuff. GSMC Fantasy Football on Twitter. Send me your Week 13 lineup, and we'll go yay or nay, and we'll tell you why a little bit too. So it will help me get to know some of you guys playing fantasy football. Tell me if anything that I say or any of on the network have said anything that has been able to aid in your success, or maybe we gave you some crap advice. That's always fun. You can't hit 100% of the shots you take, but it's just about shooting. You got to shoot until, you finally make one. I've missed on a couple beats. That Michael Thomas trade I made in the beginning of the year to ride it out when I was basically 4-2 living high, that was a bad beat. I should have kept DeAndre Hopkins. But if I make the playoffs and Michael Thomas turns up, who knows, right? That's always the if then about that, who knows? Like, it's the and if statements and all that stuff. So, everybody misses every now and again. So that's the big ticket right there. I'm pretty sure I missed on Dalvin. I passed on him multiple leagues just because multiple mock drafts, just for the fact of the matter is I didn't trust his injury history. And for the most part, Dalvin has been pretty healthy for majority of the season, which is good for him and good for the Vikings, and that's good for people who own fantasy owners, even though he's kind of slipped in a week or so. But start your studs, people. That's numero uno on today's pod, is start your studs, and whatever happens, happens. Right? This is not a time to start gambling with the hot hand, as some people would tend to do right here. Like, I don't want to gamble with the hot hand, even though technically I am, but my hot hand gambling with putting in Cam Akers, I think is a little valid to do, because Cam Akers has been on my team since draft. Him and Alvin are the only two players, I think. Let me just fact check this. They're the only two players that I have had since draft day, and it's quite telling where my team has been since. But GSMC will be right back. Stay tuned.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, so I wanted to come back into the podcast talking about a few NFL more related topics. One of them is more related to fantasy, about how you approach the remainder of your season. How do you do that? Why would you do that? But another one is more NFL related, probably due to all the things moving and shaking within the league. But first, I'm more closer to the fantasy side of things. I want to talk about teams. Should you avoid full teams when it comes to fantasy football? Right? So the big thing here is what you don't want to do is look at a guy like, let's say, I don't want to use the team I'm going to use for example. Let's say New England, right? New England was a team that a lot of people, especially me, I'm thinking, okay, I need to avoid this team because they're kind of slumping in a direction I want no part in. And there was like a lot of barren wasteland stuff going on. And then we saw the Rex Burkhead game, and then we got the Jacoby Myers game, and then we got a lot of different other wide receivers getting involved in that offense, having decent days. And now you're wondering, well, who do I really trust besides Cam? And even then, Cam is having Cam days. So Cam's numbers are all rushing yards and then a few passing yards these days. That's just what it is. That's what Cam is here to offer you. But on another note, like talking about the Ravens right now, and the only person that you can really realistically start is Lamar, and everybody else is kind of wishy-washy, right? You know, Mark Andrews is wishy-washy, touchdown dependent, like most tight ends. So it's not really his fault, but the offense is just really inept. Like, it's not great, doesn't do anything, but am I going to tell you to avoid them? I mean, we saw Marquise Brown get a touchdown on a 70-yard play, but it wasn't from Lamar. It wasn't even from RG3. It was from their third string, who just came off the truck or something like that. It's just a weird situation that the Ravens are in, but they have a chance to really make a run at this playoff potential, potentially, but they need a lot of things to go their way. But moving on from there, I wanted to talk about teams that I feel like you should avoid for fantasy football for the remainder of the season, right? Number one, first team that comes off of my lips is going to be Denver. The Denver Broncos are not a good offensive team. Here's why. Now, Philip Lindsay owners, close your ears. Melvin Gordon owners, close your ears. The committee is not favorable for us in fantasy. It is horrible. It's actually agonizing pain. It brings me to new degrees of understanding of why I dislike playing fantasy football, because it makes me think that players are bad because they don't perform well for fantasy. Now, not really. Like, I understand the disassociation between disassociate fantasy football production and football success. I understand that. However, a lot of people still will sit here and call players trash because of their fantasy football performances. Players push back on that a lot anyway. So I don't have to defend players. They defend themselves well enough anyway. And, they get paid way more money than any of us do. And we depend on them for happiness. It is what it is. We depend on them way more than they need us. So with that said, Denver is not great of a offensive potential situation. We know Noah Fant was getting it in earlier in the year. We saw Jerry Jeudy kind of turning it on. I was predicting KJ Hamler would be a really good pickup, and he still might be, but that offense right now, the offensive line is bad. I don't see how they really recover for anything like this. We still are not sure Drew Lock is any good. Like, not just a little bit good, but like I don't know if there's any real good redeeming qualities of Drew Lock besides his arm strength, because his accuracy is horrible. That's just kind of where they at. Melvin Gordon and Philip Lindsay are super touchdown dependent. Philip is literally the inside the 20s. I get the touches inside the 20s sort of running back, and Melvin has kind of become the touchdown guy. Interestingly enough, it didn't always used to be that way, huh? Well, I guess so during the Chargers days, of course. I said Chargers days, like he just left there, but Austin Eckler, he was not getting touchdowns like that. He was just working in between tackles, and then Melvin Gordon was finishing drives and stuff like that when they were both good. And then last year, of course, we know what happened. Melvin wasn't 100%. Austin Eckler definitely proves that he was the guy that they wanted to move on with moving forward, so on and so forth. But I wanted to bring up the idea that it's best to avoid them mainly because of the matchups. So let's look at who they are going to be playing for the remainder of the season, because that's the biggest point. So They already went against, New Orleans. They have to go up against Kansas City next week, week 13. They have to go up against Carolina, whose defense, is not as bad as you might think. They have to go against Buffalo, who is still, trying to get higher seeding and playoff picture stuff. They have to go up against the Chargers in week 16. So you would think that, defensively, these guys are not like super studs. Like, it's not like they have to have a Steelers on their roster or something like that. But we have to remember that their offense is not good. Like, their offense is not good enough for us to think that these other teams can't take advantage of bad play. So if you can afford to bench someone, which I would assume that you can if you're in the playoff hunt, because if you weren't, your team's probably not that great, or you got injuries, or whatever the case may be, you're in a bad spot. Understandable, that's the case. You might want to put them down. They might have to sit down for a while. So the next team I'm thinking that might have to sit down for, near the tail end is Miami. So hear me out. Miami's run should be better, right? But I'm not sure. Tua is kind of scaring me right now. We don't really know. Coach Brian Flores said today, Thursday, that his status for the Bengals could come down to game time decision, and that's never good. But they'll take it a day at a time. So Tua with a thumb injury, still the memory of the Broncos game, still in the memories of people's minds. It's not always great, but looking past that, Cincinnati is their best matchup, and if Tua doesn't play, you're kind of just right. If you're starting Ryan Fitzpatrick, go ahead. But I'm sorry, they have to play New York. I'm sorry, no, they don't. See, sometimes I click on players and I look through their seasons that way on ESPN because it's easier. But because Tua did not play in Week 12 against New York, he doesn't have any stats. So he does play, if he does, against Cincinnati, which is a plus matchup. Their defense is really bad, and they could really get some things going. But it's not like Tua has really lit up the passing game. His best passing performance was 248 and 2 touchdowns against Arizona, which was a good performance. He really played well, but that is his best overall fantasy value point earning day. Cincinnati, if he does play, would probably be his second most or the highest. Then he has Kansas City, which will be a really big stressor game, and I think they might want to see what they have within him against Kansas City, just see what he can do. Then he plays New England Week 15, who has been playing better, and then they have the Las Vegas Raiders, who can put up some points. And I don't know if Tua has the poise to play under multiple, score every single drive sort of games within him. And I would be a little nervous. I know for certain I'm nervous about the wide receivers not named, of course, Devontae Parker. And if Tua does play, I would be a little nervous about Devontae Parker because it seems like Devontae Parker and Tua haven't really figured it out. But Jakeem Grant and Tua figured it out. But if they don't play, or if Tua doesn't play, then Jakeem's stock kind of falls. And it's all, it's kind of all over the place. So I think Miami is a team that I would kind of be hesitant to start in any sort of place. We don't have to really talk about the Jets too much. You can talk about Rashad Perriman. You can talk about Denzel Mims a bit. But we're not starting Frank Gore. That's desperation stuff right there. I hope there's more value out there for you. But we don't have to talk about the Jets. Let's talk about Dallas, shall we? Let's talk about the NFC East. Whoop, whoop. Trash. I don't like talking about it, but they play Baltimore Week 13. That's a bad matchup for Zeke. Horrible matchup for Zeke. We've seen what Baltimore's done to running backs. If what they did to Nick Chubb is any indication, you just don't start Zeke if you can afford to not start Zeke. But he is going to get the touches, so that might be, just his floor in recent weeks has been so bad that you just don't want to, chance it. But They play Baltimore. Then they play Cincinnati. Then they play San Francisco, which is not a good Zeke plus matchup. Then they play Philadelphia, who, for a bad offensive line, Philadelphia's defensive front is pretty strong, and they can hold their own, and they can make some noise in that backfield. Andy Dalton's not a spring chicken. He can't really move in the pocket that well. He's more of a, I don't even call him a check down guy, because that's not what he is, but he's more of a sit in the pocket and try to make something happen there than, make somebody miss, get a first down, even though he showed some wheels against Washington of all teams, but you saw what happened. Washington was getting after it, and then they put him down to the ground. So, Michael Gallup owners, relax. This is not the stretch you want Michael Gallup at all, which means that Michael Gallup was not wanted at all at any point in the season except for the preseason. So keep that in mind. If you have CeeDee Lamb, you probably still start him, especially against Cincinnati. If you have Amari Cooper, you probably still start him unless you have a better option that you feel more, feel better about. But especially, I would not be real keen on starting Cowboys players for Week 13. That's just who I feel personally that's the case. So I think those teams in particular are players I want to avoid. I think Jacksonville is interesting because we all know about James Robinson. He's an instant start. He's instant carries every time. He's an auto start no matter who they play. They play Minnesota, Tennessee, Baltimore, Chicago for the remaining 4 games of the season, fantasy-wise. Chicago's defense is pretty real, but the thing about it is we don't know if Gardner Minshew will come back. And there's a lot of players on the Jacksonville Jaguars that we all kind of like, right? I like DJ Shark, even though he's kind of been weird. I like Keenan Cole, who's kind of been weird, Laviska Shenault at the start of the season had promise. I like him, but he's been kind of wishy-washy, especially after injury. So there's a lot of things to kind of be wary of when it comes to this fantasy stuff. And that's what I kind of want to go through right now. That's what I wanted to go through currently. Is just talk about what exactly is, what's happening here with these teams. Who do they play against? What kind of systems, defense are they going to be facing? And things of the like, because that is going to matter down the stretch way more. Because right now it's thinking just get in the playoffs. But after that, it's like who is going to be your best lineups moving forward for the remainder of the season? Where are your bye week coming at? Because there's going to be some hard times to come for a lot of different individuals because some bye weeks are late. Like Tampa Bay's bye week is this week, and I know that hurt me because I don't have Ronald Jones, who seems to be kind of catching stride. And I know people who have Gronk or people who still start Tom Brady or people who have Mike Evans or Chris Godwin. That's going to hurt them for this week. And is really the reason why, I always kind of hold out for week 13s because I don't really like them too much. I don't want too many players on teams that have week 13 buys because this is the sort of situation that you can get into. And that's something that I would kind of stray away from. So with that said, we're going to take our final break of the podcast here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some coaching changes, things that are happening within the league offices, and then a little bit about final picks in my daily fantasy $2 extravaganza, GSMC.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, GSMC, we are here and we fear nothing. GSMC, final segment, and I want to talk about coaching changes. So we already know Matt Patricia was kicked off the island. He was booted out of the Among Us lobby. Was he the imposter? We will know next season. But on the realist note, we know a lot of things are changing. You know, the GM for the Jacksonville Jaguars was let go recently. We know Bill O'Brien was fired in the beginning of the season. We know that, of course, Matt Patricia is gone. We know that Dan Quinn is gone. There's a lot of coaching vacancies. And I expect probably some more later on down the line. Of course, we know the status of Adam Gase is solely dependent on what happens with their pick. Because if they can somehow secure the number one pick away from everybody else, then, of course, they are going to let go of Adam Gase promptly afterwards, right? That makes the most sense. That seems to be the most realistic scenario for Jets fans and the ownership. I think they bring back the GM because I think they like him. But clearly we understand that coaching is not working out for Adam Gase in New York, and I don't know where it will, but I just know that he has to go. It's one of those situations where, you know, you don't have to go home, but you got to get the bleep out of here. That's what they're doing. They're waiting to do that to Adam Gase. I want to talk about two in particular coaching situations that are very interesting to me that I feel like are on the verge of coming to an ugly end. I think that in Chicago, we're going to see a bad ending to their coaching situation. Matt Nagy came into Chicago with this notion that he's an offensive guru, right? Offensive genius, really interesting play caller. He showed a lot of that during his time in year one. You know, he was using Trubisky on design runs. He was doing read options. He was throwing it. He had really interesting play calling, design motion stuff. And then it kind of just stopped, right? And this isn't the first time I've noticed this. I've been watching the Matt Nagy show a lot because I remember the Jordan Howard show quite a bit. And when he was up there that one year after the year he went off, he was nothing. And it wasn't because Jordan Howard stunk. It was because of the fact that they just didn't give him the ball. And maybe Tariq Cohen is the end-all, be-all of the Chicago Bears' woes and issues, which is not the truth. Of course, we know that. But there's just no creativity in his offense anymore. And maybe it's probably due to the fact that the quarterback play is not great. They brought in Nick Foles, right? Remember this offseason, they brought in Nick Foles. They talked about quarterback battle, make Trubisky really work for the starting job. And they gave Trubisky the starting job. Well, let's face it here. Trubisky was never going to be the main starter because they didn't believe in him in the first place. So they bring in the other guy who they traded for, mind you. They didn't just draft some guy. They didn't do this. They didn't pick a guy up in free agency who's kind of been stinted around all the place. They traded for him from the Jaguars. They traded Nick Foles from the Jaguars, and they basically told everybody that, hey, if Mitchell Trubisky stinks, this is going to be our guy. And, so be it. Mitchell Trubisky had some stinkers in the beginning of the games. He has never played a purely solid game of football in his career yet in the NFL. And in the beginning of in this season, where he would be so hot or cold, we understand what he did against Detroit, but as we see now, Detroit was never good. It was fool's gold. And we're starting to see that the Bears were fool's gold too, because in the beginning of the season, they were getting wins that necessarily they probably didn't deserve. They beat the Falcons, and that was whatever, but it wasn't really that crazy, right? The Falcons were horrible on defense in the beginning, and clearly they've gotten better. Every team has essentially gotten better to some standpoint, and we're really seeing who is good in the NFL and who is not. We've known that for weeks now, and the Bears are not a good team, and I don't blame Matt Nagy for, quarterback situation. That you can't always, some quarterback is hard, right? It's hard to get the guy at quarterback. The Bears haven't had the guy at quarterback, I don't think ever, honestly. So it's not like Matt Nagy was going to be the key to fixing this. They took Trubisky before he got there, I think, and he's just been trying to deal with that ever since. Now, do I think it's fair to say that his play calling has been less to be desired? Yes, that is perfectly fair, and I'm going to be here to say it. It's been less than what is desired, and that defense has been carrying them and really putting up wins in place of his honor, in place of that offensive honor for a few years now. Khalil Mack, all those boys are really doing some things that are kind of unprecedented. If that defense was on, I don't know, any other prevalent offensive team, this would be a Super Bowl questioner. Like, this would be a sleeper for Super Bowl, projections and stuff like that. But we saw this with Jacksonville, and when their defense was like legit, and they had a guy in Blake Bortles who just was not a good player. Like, he could not throw the football well. And they still got to the championship game. And unfortunately, it ain't work out for them. But you know what? That's just how far some teams' defenses can take you. But in this league, you really need a quarterback who can move the ball down the field, who, some people, like Kirk Cousins is serviceable. Is he a Super Bowl winner? Of course, he hasn't won one, but can he win games for you in the playoffs? He beat the Saints, so maybe, right? Maybe. But, you need a guy who can at least win you a playoff game. I think that's where you start right now for the Bears. You need a guy that can win you a playoff game. I'm not going to sit here and say that Matt Nagy needs to go, but there definitely needs to be some changes in the coaching philosophy. And there needs to be a new identity made for the Bears, because right now the identity has been defense for like 40 years. And yeah, it's great and dandy, but defense alone is not going to win you championships any longer. They say defense wins championships, which is fine, but offense is ultimately going to trump good defense in the National Football League at this point in its inception. Offenses are running rampant. We saw what the Chiefs did against Tampa Bay, and if they didn't take their foot off the gas, that game is nothing. The game is done, right? We got to keep that in mind here. New Orleans could have put up 50 on Tampa Bay, but they chose not to, right? They didn't have to. Offenses are out of control. And to make matters a little bit worse, we're seeing time and time again that these guys who are supposedly offensive-minded dudes who come in and stink it up, and then teams are kind of left with nothing. Like, a lot of these coaches end up leaving these teams with nothing. Like, the Jets are nothing. Miami, when it was picked up, was nothing. After 2 stints of Adam Gase, it was nothing. Jacksonville is gutted right now, and I don't think they're going to fire their head coach, but gutted is something, man. And then finally, something about Dallas. Dallas. We're always talking about Dallas. This is going to be another one and done here. We saw one in Cleveland last year with Freddie Kitchens, and this is going to be another one and done situation right here, right now. I think Mike McCarthy has to go, because what's happening here from a play calling standpoint, from a decision making standpoint, this is getting out of control. So I don't know what the Cowboys can do, but we saw the play. We understand the play. We know what happened. That 4th down fake punt decision is some of the worst coaching I've ever seen. And everybody on Reddit, in the Green Bay subreddits, were saying, you see, this is what we were trying to tell you for years about Mike McCarthy. Aaron Rodgers is the only reason we won that Super Bowl. It had nothing to do with Mike McCarthy, yada, yada, yada. And now we're seeing some inclinations that this was in fact the case. And maybe this means that Dak actually is really that good. Because I almost said Matt Nagy. He's not great. Mike McCarthy is not doing well. I don't know what's going on. I don't know who's calling the plays anymore. Keenan Allen, not Keenan Allen, but their offensive coordinator, who seemed to be really good for a while. I don't know what he's doing. Dallas is just a train wreck. We understand injuries are a part of it, and the defense was horrible before the injuries, but now this is just becoming pitiful. When you have a chance to win the NFC East and salvage something, Andy Dalton isn't horrible, but their offensive line is banged up. They can't protect him against good fronts. There's just not a lot going on. Zeke can't take pressure off of anything because he can't get more than 2.5 yards per carry. I'm exaggerating. It's like 3.2 or something like that. But it's not great. It's not Zeke caliber. It's not what we expect from him. I don't know if he's hurt. I don't know if something else is going on. But Zeke is not playing at the level that we necessarily have seen him play at or what we expect from him. So that is very concerning, to say the very least. So I think that is going to be a big time situation where I think they separate ways. I think Jerry Jones feels humiliated as an owner. I think he's not a fan of what the direction the Cowboys is going, but I think he's also a patient man and he's a very loyal man. And I don't think he's chosen to be loyal to, Mike McCarthy. Also, tidbit, he made fun of, basically, the guy that Mike McCarthy drafted just because he met him in the elevator, DiNucci, because he said that when he was asked about the Broncos situation, he said, listen, we had a similar situation where we had to start DiNucci, a guy that we who's basically saying that we got him from the hotel room, wasn't any good. You have him on your roster. You have him on your payroll. You pay him. So what does that make you think? What does that make you think about Mike McCarthy, right? Because that was Mike McCarthy's guy, I guess. He brought him in here, kind of basically did him a favor, and now he's basically talking junk, kind of, right? I don't know. It's a weird thing. Of course, we can do a little rankings here. I think Adam Gase is the, supreme number one overall firing draft pick for the remainder of the season, has been, and he will forever be the lock that just won't happen until they lock up Trevor Lawrence. So with that said, I think for the remainder of the season, I think Mike McCarthy has to be number one. I think he has to be number one. I think Matt Nagy is number two. I think that Doug Peterson is 3. So 2 NFC East teams, who would have thought 2 of them that had the most expectations have the 2 coaches that are potentially going to be out of there. And I think that there might be a sneaky firing of not Zach Taylor, but the coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. I don't want to see it happen. I want to give him another shot, but I know people are not a fan of what's been happening and the losing and the unclutch. They can't close out games. I think that is a big deal to a lot of people in football world because, who's a Chargers fan, right? But yeah, that sounds like something that might end up changing around real soon. Of course, we already know that the Texans don't have a head coach. That's an interesting place where that'll go. But with that, that's the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. We're going to take it easy and take it out of here and go into the new week. After the weekend, we'll see what happens in my last league. Let's see if we get in. Hope we can get in. I hope you all get into the playoffs. And if your season was already done 2 weeks ago, relax or play some daily fantasy. I know we didn't get to it this week, but we'll get to it next week for sure, because that is going to be what a lot of people are playing now since seasons are wrapping up. GSMC, I'll see you all next week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.